Welcome to Lumient Live. I'm your host, Mark Ackroyd. Lumient Live is the podcast for advice professionals that believe in a values-based advice experience, but still have that question, how does it all work? We connect listeners with other advice professionals to hear best practice client stories or business examples and lift the lid on how they made it happen. Now, on to today's episode. G'day and welcome to another episode of Lumient Live. Today I'm joined by Sarah Matthews, Head of Advice Delivery at Virtual Business Partners. G'day Sarah, nice to have you.
Hey Mark, how's it going?
Yeah, really good, thanks. It's so good to have you on board. You know, we met probably over a month ago now at the time of recording at the Virtual Business Partners conference over in Cebu in the Philippines. And it's been nice to be able to organise to get you on board. We're going to have a great chat today.
Yes, no, I'm still catching up from the vibe of the conference. Yeah, it was an awesome time. So glad you could make it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pack so much energy in a few days and not need some time for some recovery. But it was a good event.
Oh yes, I lost my voice a couple of times, so yeah, it was a big few days.
For our audience and for those that don't know Sarah, let me tell you a little bit about her and her journey, and then we'll get straight into the content of today's episode. But Sarah started her career in the financial service industry in 2009 while completing an economics degree at Macquarie University. During her time working at small to mid-sized wealth management firms, she immediately felt drawn to helping people with their money, and at 23 became a licensed advisor and mortgage broker. After feeling disheartened by the need to push financial products and increase fun to be a successful advisor, she looked deeper into people's relationships with money, including her own. Taking a journey to further understand the psychology of money and the importance of mindset, values, and purpose, Sarah established her own coaching business while at the same time working in the paraplanning division of NAB, supporting advisors to deliver best interest advice. Today, Sarah is the Head of Advice Delivery at Virtual Business Partners, overseeing the delivery of advice through global talent to over 250 financial advice firms and licensees. Sarah is passionate about quality financial advice and working with practices to optimize scale and ultimately deliver much needed advice to the community. Sarah, in such a short career, you know, you've packed in so much, and you know, your experience is so wide and varied. Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself outside of the bio.
Gosh, outside of the bio. So yeah, look, I have a lot of passions outside of work. I enjoy a lot of yoga, meditation. My husband's a musician. I love music as well. So, you know, we're always going to gigs and, you know, I'm helping him record music every now and then. And yeah, I love gardening, cooking. The one thing I do love to do with my hobbies is anything that requires me to actually make something physical, because I work in the digital world. I work from home full time when I'm not in the Philippines. And so being able to create something with my hands, like, you know, cooking something or growing something usually brings me a lot of joy. So yeah, that's pretty much me. And we moved to Newcastle, New South Wales about a year ago, and I love just being in nature, you know, being able to do coastal walks. We've got some amazing coastline here. So yeah, that's definitely me outside of work.
That's awesome. Well, Sarah, great to have you on board today. How about we start by telling us a little bit about your advice journey? I mean, your bio covered it a little bit there, but in your own words, tell us a bit about the journey you've been on in the financial advice industry.
Yeah, great. So when I was at uni doing my economics degree, I really wanted to get some real life experience working in the finance industry. I wasn't quite sure, you know, where to go, and I ended up falling into being a broker's assistant, so doing like equipment finance and you know, loans and things like that. And that was probably my first interaction with people and their money. And I kind of knew quite early on that I definitely wanted to take that career path. And, you know, that led me to investigating a bit more. And I found, you know, financial planning and ended up, you know, working in a number of different sized wealth firms across Melbourne and Sydney. I did a bit of moving around. And yeah, I started from working in an administrative role, to, implementation coordinator, to paraplanner, to associate advisor, and then to an advisor and a mortgage broker. So, I got the full rounded experience of how a business operates in the financial services industry. And, I enjoyed it. I worked with some really great firms. I also worked in some firms that, maybe didn't align fully to my values. It was very much how they measure success of an advisor is, the amount of product or funds under management, which always confused me because they were never really rated on the client experience. Like, your KPIs weren't tied to NPS scores or client testimonials or how many goals you helped your client achieve. And so, I had this misalignment, if you will. But I still knew that I wanted to help people with their money. And, I ended up taking a bit of a journey on a personal level as well, and looking into more of the psychology of money, the impact of our conscious and subconscious mind, limiting beliefs, and how important it is to have a well-rounded, understanding of our psyche around money. And so I was exploring that whilst I was an advisor. I ended up creating a bit of a system around that, which included both conscious and subconscious mind activities. And I ended up using those concepts and creating my coaching business, Mindfully Wealthy. So Mindfully Wealthy, I ended up coaching a lot of spiritual and creative types around their money. Generally, I find that creative types are, quite challenged by the harshness of money, investments and savings rates and things like that. And I was using, that values-based goals approach, using money as a tool to be able to manifest what it was that they wanted in their lives. And I was doing that, and, it was getting legs. And at that time, I ended up going into NAB, which I believe we crossed paths in. It's such a small industry, isn't it?
It's such a small world. Yeah, when I found out you worked at NAB in the paraplanning division, and obviously I managed a great team of advisors there, I was like, oh, you probably wrote some advice for some of my team for sure, and checked off on it.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good. And so I was there, and I was doing Mindfully Wealthy at the same time. And, I was gearing up to take Mindfully Wealthy full time. I'd connected with a number of entrepreneurs in the US, and I'd been asked to speak at a conference over there, and things were quite aligned and going along. And then suddenly my dad passed away. It was quite sudden. Well, it was sudden. And at the time I was living in Melbourne, and my mum and my little brother were in Sydney. So obviously I dropped everything. I was flying to Sydney, helping with my dad's estate. And then a month later, my mum got diagnosed with breast cancer. And so in the space of a month, I thought I was going to lose both my parents. And so that was a very, very challenging time for me. And I think it's those pivotal moments in people's lives where they're forced to kind of stop and take stock. It probably took me a good year to really kind of find passion and drive again. And by that time, I don't know, I kind of put an intention out to the universe where, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I wanted to help people on scale, and I wanted to help more people receive advice. And I didn't think that at the time Mindfully Wealthy was going to help me achieve that. So I was still doing Mindfully Wealthy, and I've still got a few clients that I see now and then, but effectively I ended up applying for a job at Virtual Business Partners. And at the time, they were looking for a technical lead to manage their team of, at the time, it was about 100 paraplanners based in the Philippines. And so something drew me to that role. It was something different, exciting, and it had scale to it. And I could share my knowledge and technical skills with quite a large group of people. And so I remember getting the job, and they're like, yeah, your first day is going to be on the ground in Cebu. So I hadn't even started working at BBP, and I flew down straight away. First day on the job, I got to see the amazing office and feel the culture and the vibe and the people, and I've been in love with it ever since. And so I've held a number of roles at Virtual Business Partners, and yeah, now I'm the head of advice delivery, and I oversee the delivery of advice across power planning, client services. I get to work with some of the most dynamic and influential advice firms and practices, helping them scale, build global teams, and yeah, it's really great, and yeah, I'm so blessed.
What an amazing journey. Let me firstly say that it's actually really impressive. I hope you feel really proud of what you've done. Because just I was taking notes as you were saying. I was like, wow, impressive. Oh wait, you've gone on to something else, impressive. So that's awesome. There's so much in there that I really want to unpack. Yeah, I think we'll get to the virtual business partners experience. I mean, the fact that you oversee so many paraplanners, client services, and work with what was it, over 200 practices, you would see a quantum of advice experiences, which is obviously what we'd love to speak about. But let me go back to your time as a money coach at Mindfully Wealthy, and some of the tools you did there. It intrigued me when you said you had tools around the conscious and subconscious, which is something we speak about a bit at Lumient, because we know that the reason we talk about values is there's conversations that people aren't having with themselves, or aren't really conscious of themselves. So I'd love to tap into that a little bit. What were some of those tools or frameworks that you had around consciousness and subconsciousness?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of tools, and I think Lumion does this really well. It kind of sparks those conversations and thinking outside, doing some inner work and making sure that what they're looking to achieve isn't just what is expected of society or what they're programmed to think, but what really aligns to their values. And as you would know, a lot of not even, it's not just advisors, but there's not many people in the world that people can come to and have those honest and frank conversations, especially about a topic as taboo as money. People get anxious and fearful, and they have self-sabotaging behaviours around money. And so the foundation of my coaching business was, we dealt with obviously the practical and the conscious side of money. So creating a budget or a spending plan, money systems, automating money so that you're less likely to self-sabotage, those kinds of things. But then when we were looking into progress and potentially why people weren't getting the progress that they wanted to see with their money, we would have conversations around, well, tell me a little bit about your parents with money. What was your earliest memory of money? And you'd often kind of unpack and find that people's experiences with money were often reflected in the actions that they took today. One of the things I remember as a financial advisor, when you'd put this awesome financial plan together, right? Like you would, model it all out, and you'd ask the client, what's your annual expenses figure? And they're like, oh, 50 grand. You're like, yeah, cool. So you put that in the modeling, and really, it wasn't 50 grand. Like everyone thinks that they can save a lot.
Hang
They
on, this
can.
is your income. It was 50 grand. Where's the rest? Where's it gone?
Where's the rest? Yeah, and so you get to the annual review, and you realize they're off track with their savings or their investment plan that you put in place. And really, at that time, it's really valuable for an advisor to take that lid off the cover, have a look at their spending, because people's spending is a reflection of their values and what they value, or their previous money programming. And so, some of the tools I used to use specifically was, I would get them to write a day in their dream life. So one of the things that people really struggle with as well, is thinking of the future and what will make them happy. A lot of us are, really living in that reactive state, paying bills, going to work, and so this would really get people to kind of think about and manifest and dream about where they would be, what they were doing with their time, who was with them, and really start breaking that down. Because a lot of people, you ask them what their dreams and goals are, and sometimes they can't even really envision themselves in that goal or what they truly want. So a lot of the time is doing, deep work, asking them about their money story, picking up on any limiting beliefs that they had around money or patterns that you've seen them, for example, if, a client I saw used to earn a significant amount of money, and they actually grew up with parents who were quite poor and who fought a lot about money. And so although this person had, really financial security and was earning a lot of money, they felt extreme guilt being able to spend money on things that they loved, because they were so used to knowing that money is a scarce resource. And those patterns that they saw from their parents, they really had to kind of reprogram their thoughts. And you can do that in a number of ways. You can question your beliefs. It really takes an extra level of awareness. If you're going to purchase something, what are the thoughts that are going through your mind at that time? And then you have to have enough self-awareness to question that. Why do I believe that? Why do I believe it's true? What would I prefer to believe? And really taking, the mental side of money and unpacking that. And that's what I love. And that's honestly where I think advisors could also add value, in a sense. Yeah.
There's so much in there that's fascinating to me. Let's go back to the start. The concept of self-sabotage is a very interesting concept to me. Can you dive a little bit deeper on that? So self-sabotage, as you explained it, is behaviors that may not be aligned to values, and I'm guessing, is that a conscious self-sabotaging or unconscious, or is there always a frame of both?
Yeah, look, so our conscious mind is our thinking mind. Our subconscious mind is about 90% of our brain. And our subconscious mind really feeds off past experiences, but more importantly, the feelings that you had in that past experience. And so sometimes that can cause, and this usually goes on with people's complete unawareness as well. And it definitely is a skill to be able to decipher if the action you're taking is a result of previous programming in your subconscious, or if it's aligned and intentional with what you're actually trying to achieve. So yes, sabotaging behavior can come in all different forms. I've coached people with spending addictions, for example. People who would constantly max out their credit cards because they are spending money, and it's almost like they don't even know that they're doing it. It's like it's almost on autopilot. And self-sabotaging behaviors come from the subconscious mind holding on to thoughts, feelings, and beliefs that, for example, oh, I don't deserve a lot of money, I should just spend it anyway, or, that instant gratification. So you might have had this amazing conversation with your advisor on, your long-term plan to be able to retire early, for example, but that conscious need to be able to fulfill desires immediately and instant gratification with, say, spending on your credit card will usually override that, your long-term goal, which really is the thing that aligns to your values. When I was coaching someone with a spending addiction, they would feel a few minutes of euphoria and then weighted by massive guilt for weeks. And so, unpacking that and the other part, the funny thing is that the coaching part is so important. I feel like you need to be there with your client. You need to be coaching them constantly, helping them align, just like a fitness coach. A fitness coach doesn't just give you a diet and a, gym routine. They're there with you, cheering you on, reminding you of your success, showing you how far you've come. And I think, whether it's money coaches or advisors, they're in that amazing position where they can really make a difference to their clients' lives. And that will tie into the client experience, because all the things we say about values conversations, having that deep, intimate understanding with your client around their money, that promotes trust. And when your client trusts you and you have that relationship, they will never go. As you know, Mark, Lumion really does try and promote those discussions, those deeper discussions, because the clients will, become so trustworthy of their advisors, they'll never leave. They're like a coach, they're their mentor.
Yeah, it strikes me there's a ton of behavior management in what you're saying here, right? And behavior management, well, behavior can be managed through consequence or affirmation, and there's time for both by the sounds of things. And if you're not that person that's affirming the right behavior when it happens, you can't expect behavior change to occur. And speaking of affirmations, the other end to all of this you've mentioned a couple times is knowing your conscious behaviors or your self-sabotaging behaviors and your money stories is almost explaining your past. But part of what struck me in what you said was also helping them create as clear a picture as possible about their future. And you were using words like manifesting, visualizing what it is you're doing, who you're doing it with. Can you talk to me about the power of doing that and why that's so important?
Yes, yes, and I was the first guinea pig in my life on those topics. It probably was around the time when my dad passed away, and I was looking for, more inner peace, if you will. Really started to get more interested in around, the power of energy and attracting what it is that you want. And if you've got a clear vision and you can articulate that in your mind's eye, if you're replaying that in your mind over and over again, you're going to draw those things to you. And I know that sounds very woo-woo, but one of the things I learned was, the door to the subconscious mind is most open, is what's called alpha state, just before you fall asleep at night and just when you wake up in the morning. And so if you've got a goal or a calling or a visualization that you want to manifest, you should be, as soon as you wake up, replaying that in your mind, harnessing senses. So what you can smell, touch, feel. Feeling is probably the most important when it comes to visualization. Rather than just seeing something and not feeling that draw to it, is not as effective. But if you can really and it's really a form of meditation, really drawing back to your inner self, what it is, where you see yourself, what are you doing, what are you wearing, those kinds of things. And if you're practicing that and you've got that clear vision, you'll find that in some cases you won't manifest what it is that you've visualized. It might be something better, but it will have the same kind of feeling and drawnness to it. And that's really what happened with my position at Virtual Business Partners. I had no idea what it was that I wanted, but I kind of knew the feeling that I wanted it to provoke. And yeah, like I totally think that manifested. And so, visualization, and the clearer you can get with your goal. And let's be honest, like most goals require a financial resource to achieve in life. And I think that's, it's a good thing, but it also means that, you can't ignore money as part of your journey. And I think that's where, when I found my niche around coaching, creative types and spiritual entrepreneurs, they're very resistant against money itself. A lot of them are doing their passion project and would, struggle with charging for their passion project. And so, yeah, that was also a very, very cool group of people I got to work with.
So the alpha state is really intriguing, and you mentioned that one of the big drivers of manifestation and visualization is helping people understand how it might make them feel. So thinking about our advisor community that might be listening to this, is it as simple as a first step for them if they were to try to put this in practice when they're getting to goals or values, asking a client how achieving them might make them feel? Is it as simple as that?
It really is. How would you feel? So, in all honesty, like the goal itself is one thing. How would it make you feel if you achieve that goal? You could even, I mean, I don't know if any advisors would do this, but you could say, all right, well, close your eyes, visualize, if it's I don't know, a house by the beach, if you will. How does that make you feel? What can you smell? You might be able to smell the ocean air or the wind on your face, and really get them into that energy of, I can have this. It's already happened. And once again, there's a lot of other things that wrap around it. This is very much around the subconscious and the belief that they can achieve their goals. But yeah, and that in itself is quite therapeutic. If you're having a bad day, I know for me, if I'm having a stressful day, a moment of meditation or, taking yourself to that place where you feel good just changes your entire outlook and, things that you attract in your day.
Yeah, I love that. That's so cool, and really practical, right? So there's a lot here that I would imagine could scare some of our advisor community, but what you've done is distill
Yeah,
it.
probably.
Well, I mean, we get it all the time, right? Do I have to be a marriage coach? Do I have to be a psychologist? Well, no. The first part is you have to care. The second part is you have to be curious enough, and the third part is you got to have a bit of courage to ask questions like, "How do you feel?" But other than that, it could be largely simple from what we hear.
And it's not, as you said, it's not for everyone. Like, I mean, ideally the advisor would harness both a very technical approach, understanding the impacts of, taxation, investments, and risk profile, and all of that. They complement it with this really humanized side. And I think that is a winning combination.
It sounds perfect to us here at Lumiant for obvious reasons, but let's let's fast forward a little bit to your time at VBP now. So you've got a large scope of I guess responsibility within that, and a large scope of management, being that a lot of your staff are overseas, right? You've got global talent. Um, and you get to work with a large number of clients. So over 200 practices use your services. The short question here is you must see a lot of stuff, and see a lot of things.
Yes.
Yeah, but the reason you went there was to help more people at scale. Tell us a little bit about how you're doing that at VBP.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, at scale. So I mean, I guess there's two parts to the VBP role, and a big part of that is our talent in the Philippines, and making sure that they're given the top education tools and support, because obviously they're learning a new financial system, all together. Like, they don't have superannuation over there and things like that. So we pride ourselves on the education and support we can give them to be able to execute and deliver great advice to our practices and clients. And the other side of that is regularly consulting with clients, whether existing or new, around what their growth strategy is, how we can ensure that they grow and scale, talking to practices around other activities they might be able to outsource. But I think for me, for example, we were at the VBP conference, and we had a lot of fantastic sponsors, practices, keynote speakers, and you could see them interacting with our Filipino team and the relationships that they build, and they genuinely see these people as part of their advice business. I've spoken to CEOs about building their org chart to ensure that there's growth and promotion for their global teams just as much as their valued onshore team. So that to me is just the ability for advisors to be able to deliver more advice and have the client conversations that we were just talking about. Is they need support to be able to execute and deliver on back office. So they're not stuck doing admin rather than doing what's meaningful and seeing the client.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you consult quite a bit with the practices that obviously end up using virtual business partners or VBP around their growth strategy. So, the fact that you've got over 200 practices, can you tell us maybe some of the ways that you're seeing advice practices grow and maybe even grow through you?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So, well, there's a couple of trends that we're seeing at Virtual Business Partners. When I first joined, only probably 7% of our client base was self-licensed. That has now doubled in, I think, the last 2 or 3 years. So we are seeing quite a large movement to self-license, and I really do think that, advisors are trying to become more entrepreneurial. And, as you would know, Mark, there's a suite of amazing technology coming out. Advisors want to be able to make that choice and select what works for them in their practice, and, create a client experience that they can deliver that's unique to them. So we're seeing a lot of that. The other thing we're also seeing is a lot of M&A, so mergers and acquisitions. You've got obviously that horizontal integration with the costs, with the idea to scale. I think we both know that self-license is quite an expensive venture. And smaller practices will struggle, being able to scale at a smaller size and, keep costs low, keep their cost to serve low. And so we've had, clients within our BBP community merge together. We're seeing also a bit of more of that vertical integration as well, especially in the bigger market. So, I think that's some of the trends that I've seen come across. But I think in terms of the advice and the way it's been delivered, things are a lot different to 10 years ago when I started my career. And, I'm definitely going to say that, the quality of the advice, more of those goals and values-based advice is definitely coming through, more of the strategic advice as opposed to the advice centered around the product, which I find, very, very refreshing. And then, of course, the element of, that client experience. And one of the things I see for the future of advice firms, especially now that, the younger generations are coming up, they're getting some of that wealth through intergenerational wealth transfer, is the need for practices to adapt to a digital client experience. So, especially, I guess, for, my generation and my age group, we've grown up in a digital world. Everything's at our fingertips. If I was going to see an advisor and they didn't have, for example, an online portal, or my documents weren't received digitally, I would find that quite, not ideal. Once again, based on the client base, if you're working with post-retirees, may not be a problem.
Sure.
But I think, yeah, it may not be a problem. But I think, and as we can see with, Lumion and, other great players coming to the market, really harnessing that digital experience where, store pretty much the entire advice journey. And, as you guys shared, being able to actually take the client through what's been achieved. I think that's so important to show the value of the advice you've given to your client. So I think, tied into that is the movement to self-license, because, advisors are seeing more out there and they're really wanting to customize that experience for their client.
Yeah, well, I mean, part of what you touch on there with self-licensing is not only are advisors entrepreneurial and want their own toys, but it does empower them to use whatever combination of toys in the tech stack that makes sense to deliver their advice at scale.
I get asked all the time. Well, we get asked all the time. What's best practice for technology? And I've come to, I get to, one of the benefits of my position at BVP is, I get to go through demos of, new software coming along and, what's out there. And the sad thing and the truth is, it's actually a technology stack. It cannot be one tool. There's not one tool out there that does everything from, a client experience, marketing, compliance, advice generation, activity. And so, usually it's a combination of those tools, and, advisors can then, as you say, kind of plug and play, what's the best option for this part of my system? What's the best option for this part of my system? Which is good because it can be customized, but it can also be very overwhelming to practices because, they're not sure which avenue to go down. So, we try and encourage, just like at the BBP conference, the sharing of ideas between, advice practices and licensees. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you mentioned obviously with virtual business partners, or your view for the next generation of the industry is to harness and embrace that digital first experience. I mean, businesses that use you and use your team by nature have to be digital, right? So when businesses come to you and they're seeking out your services, or you know, maybe in that consultation phase going, is this for me? What are some of the tips or things that you work with them on or talk to them about to be, if I could coin a term here, digital ready to obviously use your services? Because I assume you probably couldn't just walk in and be like, all right, virtual virtual business partners comes in and it's all hunky dory. They know my systems, they know my processes, all good. Like, what is it that someone has to do to embrace that digital experience?
Yeah, and look, that's a great point, because I mean, you've got two sides of the coin. You've got the digital client experience, so the ability for your client to access the digital device services. And then, yes, you make a very good point. Practices that have optimized their processes to allow for remote work. And, you know, before the pandemic, it was a very different story. You know, the full-time working from home, that digital environment was not as widely adopted. Now it's a game changer, because people have realized that, you know, just because someone's located somewhere else, they can still add as much value to a business as if they were pretty much in the office. So there's if we're consulting with a new business that's never outsourced before, and you know is looking to create a global team, we would start by understanding what it is that they're wanting to achieve with a global team member. You know, we would probably have them think about, you know, some of the processes that are happening in their business. Now, one of the things I do find, sometimes practices will have had people work there for quite a long time, and you know the processes, the procedure, the props, the system itself is in someone's head as opposed to mapped out. But that's where virtual business partners comes in, because we saw that as you know, a bit of a challenge to some of our practices, and we wanted to ensure that anything that was outsourced to our team, you know, they had complete guidance. They've got like a flow chart. They've got something that they can reference to be able to execute. And so as part of the onboarding experience, when we bring on clients, is we actually help them document and map that process, the process that they're looking to outsource. And then, of course, we can continue to build that over the relationship. And that doesn't just benefit the ability to build a global team, but it also creates, you know, that risk mitigation factor in the business. Because if someone leaves onshore, and I've seen this happen quite a bit, you know, if your operations manager or, you know, your head client services manager ups and leaves, and everything that they do is in their head, you know,
game over, pack it up.
Yeah, everyone's going to be scrambling a little bit to understand what it was that they did. So always we encourage that for both doesn't matter if you're working with an onshore or offshore team, that documented business intelligence is so important. But at the same time, having worked in this industry for quite a while, I think we're all experiencing a little bit of change fatigue. So there'll be a new process, and and so that then requires the discipline to go back and rewrite or redo the process or the system. But as I said, at VBP, we have a team of document writers. We have a team that will go in with the client and actually literally walk through with them what it is that they do to execute. We might make recommendations on best practice. So that's definitely part of it. And I think, it works pretty well.
That's awesome. You know, process mapping and process documentation is often overlooked and undervalued. I think it's a real fundamental tip that's come up a few times actually within the Lumient Live podcast, but it comes up a few times for good reason, that it is often overlooked and undervalued. Sarah, this has been an amazing conversation. Like we do, we're about to wrap up, but like we do with all our industry experts, of now we get to call you one on our podcast to have you here. Is we like to check in with them on their values, and I'm going to bring up the Lumient values here, and like with all our other guests, I'm going to ask you, if you look at the value statements on the screen here, tell us about the one that sticks out the most for you as the most important to you, and what it means to you.
Yeah, look, I think for me, pursue work with purpose is probably my top. And funnily enough, that to me ties in as well with the spiritual, help others lead a more purposeful life. And I think, if you're lucky enough to find, and I know advisors often feel like this, like I know some advisors who are so passionate and love what they do every day, and they'll put up with all the noise with the regulatory systems and the compliance because they love helping people with their money. And I've been lucky enough to have a career that has allowed me to pursue work with purpose and also impact the lives of others. And in virtual business partners, that's just kind of expanded further and further. So yeah, I think if you can work with purpose, you're blessed. Absolutely.
Sarah, and look, that from the outsider looking in, I can see that shine through in everything that you've said and everything that you've done. So it totally rings true. Thank you so much for your time today. We've covered so much content in here, going through your personal advice journey and stopping to talk about your time as a money coach, unpacking the conscious and subconscious tools you use with people to understand how they might have self-sabotaging behaviours when it comes to achieving their goals, but also the power of manifestation and visualizing and getting them to discuss and articulate how goal achievement might make them feel, and getting those ends of the spectrum right to get the behavior change that we need. But then we finished with talking about your time now at Virtual Business Partners and how you consult with people and see people systemize the process so that they can get scale, but they can't get scale or get that entrepreneurialism that you're seeing that trend go towards without doing the basics like nailing, documenting their process. So, Sarah, there is a ton of tips in there that I'm sure our community will take a lot out of. On behalf of our entire community, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure. And yes, I hope to see you again soon, maybe in Cebu.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Lumient Live. If you really enjoyed it, we'd love if you could hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast provider so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming episodes. Thanks again for tuning in.